And I think that we have to disassociate well, I was VP of this or director of that, and start thinking about, well, what's your skills map, and start identifying with all the good things that you can do and how you might transfer that into either another full-time role. Maybe it's a part-time role. Maybe you are what I call the trivial pursuit pie graph and the pie piece, and you have 6 things that you do.
Hey, welcome back to the Ageism Survival Guide. I'm John Steck. Today, we're joined by someone who has spent his career helping organizations rethink how they lead, how they learn, and how they treat their people. Dan Pontefract is a Canadian-based and globally recognized leadership and culture strategist, a 6-time award-winning author, and a 5-time TEDx speaker. He's a Thinkers 50 Radar honoree and the founder of the Pontefract Group. His work has shaped leaders and organizations around the world, from SAP and Business Objects to his decade at TELUS. Dan's writing, now that he has published numerous books, appears in outlets like Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and IMD, and his books, including Open to Think, Work-Life Bloom, and his newest, which is going to be available on the 5th of May, The Future of Work is Gray, have become essential reading for anyone who's trying to build their workplaces into more human, more collaborative, and adaptive spaces. But before all of that, I have to say that Dan had one of the most important character building roles in modern civilization. He was, for a brief but unforgettable 2 months, a Wendy's fry guy. And according to his own LinkedIn page, and you can go and check it out, nothing says future of work visionary like a man who has really risen from the deep fryer. And it's a story that I absolutely love. So today we're going to spend most of the time talking about Dan's upcoming book, The Future of Work is Gray, because I think it absolutely fits the topic of the Ageism Survival Guide channel. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dan Pontefract. Welcome to the Ageism Survival Guide.
John, thank you. I'm so proud, honored, humbled to be here, your first guest. And thank you, first of all, for shining a light on a subject that far too many are afraid to. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into our discussion.
So could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I know I scratched the surface, but who is Dan Pontefract?
Well, so I'm trying to be the opposite or the antithesis of my last name, first of all, John. So in Latin, Pontefract is broken bridge. Ponte is bridge, fract is to break. So I'm trying to be the opposite. I'm trying to build bridges. And so what I've always been trying to do, I suppose, right, whether I was an academic, then I went to the dark side, into the corporate world, as you mentioned. And I've always been in sort of education, leadership, culture building roles. And I'm just basically, the itch to scratch has always been, how do people, whether they're leaders or individual contributors, either or are my fancy, how do they interoperate better together to achieve the goals of whatever that organization may be that not-for-profit, public sector, or for-profit? So I've always been fascinated by what gets in the way. Do some people burn the bridge? Do some people flood it out? Do some people sort of run fast over it, even though it's rickety? And then do others sort of build a stable culture building, if you will, type of bridge? And in that kind of metaphor, I've always been also interested in the itches to scratch of the planks on the bridge. So that could be collaboration, that could be purpose, that could be how we create and or make decisions, that could be how we execute on those said decisions, that could be my disdain for employee engagement and work-life balance, and how do we find better ways to integrate life with work. Or recently, somewhat obviously, age and it its manifestation of the good and the not so good as people are crossing that bridge. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. 3 kids, all of them in university right now. So it's costing Denise and I, my beloved, a fortune. We've been married coming up to 31 years. We did really get married young. And yeah, we live in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, having both of us met in our undergrad at McGill University, looked at each other, and somehow Denise said yes to my flimsy proposal. And we got married right after graduation and moved from Montreal to British Columbia.
Fantastic. So with that proposal, did you pull out the Fry Guy credential? Was that the winning line?
That was hidden for a while until I had the gumption to suggest that I was a Fry Guy for 2 months. But honestly, that's so funny you bring that up, because as everyone should be, you're formulated by your roles and your decisions and your career somewhat, obviously. That taught me so much as a 16-year-old about what to do and what not to do. That manager, Dave, was his name. Manager Dave was a jerk. And that's partially why I didn't want to stick around after 2 months. It was like, why do you have to treat, I mean, I know I'm 16, but do you have to treat me as if I'm not human? It was just so bizarre. So it took me probably 6 seconds to realize I can't stay in this gig. I need to go find another gig. But it took me 2 months to find my way into what was called Food City, the grocery store that employed me all the way through to university.
No, that's fantastic. I agree with you 100% that those early jobs are incredible learning pools where you just understand what you want or don't want in the rest of your life.
Totally.
You fully understand that one. Now, since today we're going to talk mostly about your book, you mentioned, and we talked about that you had multiple books, but how did that topic of age somehow get on your radar? Like what made that pop on your radar and made it interesting enough and pertinent enough for you to dive in and write an entire book about it?
A couple reasons, John. First, I'm trying to make up for a mistake, so I'll come back to that in a second. But I was actually in the midst of writing another book called Work-Life Bloom, which came out in 2023. And I'm not trying to name drop books. I'm just giving you the chronology. But as I was writing it in 2021, we're still kind of locked up-ish pandemic. But I got an email from one of my speaker bureaus. And so, I do 30 to 50 keynotes a year amongst all my other little dalliances with work. And the email basically went something like this. It was like, hey, Dan, heads up, we're refreshing the roster. Thanks for your service. And I was like, whoa, we've been in business like for 10 years, 15 years maybe. And a form letter, what I think it's an ageist letter. So I called out the bureau individual and on it, and I'm like, what's behind this? What's going on here? Oh, as if like I wasn't going to follow up. Oh, Dan, yeah. Well, yeah, in fact, we are refreshing the roster. And I'm like, so middle-aged white guy, like is there too many of us? What's the deal? And you just felt and saw the intrepidation of my inquisition on the why. I was like, am I too old? Like, no, not really. I'm like, not really. And it's just this very disturbing, uncomfortable, ageist conversation, right. Which I was like, okay, fine. That's how you want to play this game. I will come back to haunt you. That's going to happen. Not in I call you out. I'm not naming the bureau. I'm not naming the individual by any stretch. But it was one of those, here I'm writing a book about something entirely else. And I thought I was going to drop it to get right into this age issue because it stirred something in me. But then this is the mea culpa part. I realized that I had never paid attention to age. And here I was, both a chief learning officer at SAP and TELUS, where I was in charge of leaders, culture, developing people. And that was through my 30s, 40s, and early 50s, basically. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, why wasn't I thinking about age at the height of sort of my executive prowess? And I really went for a longish bike ride, longer than normal, sort of like one of those 120K rides to kind of cleanse myself with the John, why wasn't I thinking about age when I'm trying to develop leaders? Never crossed my mind. So then I start replaying some of the things as a chief learning officer that I did and didn't do. And I thought, okay, well, that's a swing. It wasn't even a swing and a miss, John. I just missed. Like, I didn't even swing. I sat there and didn't even think about it. I wasn't even in the batter's box. So
And I think you were not alone.
The two impetus.
I think you were not alone. I think certainly in the companies that I worked, there was never a discussion about that. Not with HR, not with the training or development. We had the same. So you were definitely not alone. But sorry, let you continue with your mea culpa.
Well, I appreciate the support. That was very kind of you. It's quite empathic of you. But it really did gnaw at me. 120-kilometer ride did not do anything other than deplete my iron levels, I suppose, but it didn't do anything. So I thought, oh my God, I have to pause this, but I have to finish the other book I'm writing. And then immediately I need to get into this other one because I knew there was something there. So that book, Work-Life Bloom, I finished that up essentially the beginning of 2022. It published in fall of 2023, but books are so weird because it takes like a year and a half to get it into the market, yet you finished it essentially. So I then in 2022 began in earnest the beginnings of researching and thinking and interviewing and just like putting my toe in the water of this whole age and particularly the workplace. Like I am all pro for the people who are writing about longevity and age in society and those for individuals, great. But I wasn't as interested in that per se, because here I am thinking again about what just affected me in my quote career, or at least part of my career, with a speaker bureau saying, hey, see you later. And then me going back and doing the existential crisis cross correlation, excuse me, of Dan, you missed this as a leader. So in 2022, 2023, 2024, effectively, I just was digging and listening. And there weren't a lot of yous out there. There still aren't a lot of yous that are actually now raising this bar up and saying, is there ageism happening in our organizations? What is happening with age in our organizations? And I started to reach out and talk to a fair number of people that were in the community, that were in the space, and my brain exploded. It was my own come to Jesus meeting with myself. I was like, okay, this is going to be something for sure, and here we are, essentially.
Yeah, it's certainly a kind of a crisis, developing crisis, and look, in a world that's filled with crises right now, you've actually, I think, coined yet another one. You coined something called the age debt crisis, and I think that jumps like right into the heart of your book. Maybe we can start there and talk about what that is, sure, what it means, and some of the implications of what is an age debt crisis.
Well, no one likes to be in debt, first of all, right? I mean, I had some student university debt when I left McGill. Took a couple years to get rid of that loan, but it felt good when it was gone. But the pressure, that stress, that anxiety, that, oh my God, I'm in debt, that was just not fun for my first 3 or 4 years of my career. Age debt, I hope, is sort of a very similar, analogous weight that organizations and leaders really must wrestle with and try to expunge. And so for me, what it came down to was 4 key, I suppose, categories of debt that accumulate this overall age debt. So very simply, number 1 is demographic apocalypse / demographic disruption. There's a age debt blindness for leaders and organizations that just are not listening to the tarot cards of demography change. So we can maybe tackle that a little bit. So demography change, number 1. Number 2, to the point of this wonderful podcast and what you're digging into, ageism. I mean, it is both invisible and blatant. And it is not just ageist for older workers. We're talking ageism right through the organization, from the 16-year-old fry guy at Wendy's to the Warren Buffett, recently retired. So you see it right across the gamut. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is indeed longevity, meaning organizations and the people who are under their employ, no one's really thinking or helping the organization prepare for a longevity type, I guess, lifestyle, work style. And so that may be things like not doing anything about menopause for women who may be suffering from menopause, or just sort of, oh, we don't talk about that. That's not a thing. We're like, oh, wait a second. Like, actually, it is a thing. Or grandparent care, where a grandparent may be looking after because of the fact that they're still at work and they're grandparents, but they're actually supporting children that are, 20, 18, 16, 10. So just a bunch of things that aren't happening with the discussion of where longevity is going. And in particular to that is also preparing to live longer. So the financial pieces to living longer, which is a good news story, but we're not really helping organizations or employees see the forest through the trees on that one. And then the 4th is wisdom. So there is, sadly, this is affecting mostly organizations who have employed middle to older age workers, and then they gas them. They're gone. They're gaslit out of the organization. They are terminated. They're annexed. They're nixed. Whatever word you want. And what we don't do, and what's happening, is there's this hollowing out of knowledge and wisdom and intelligence and, tacit knowledge. And these organizations are now like, well, where's Betty? And what happened to payroll? I've been paid in 3 weeks. Or where's Junip? And Junip used to have that relationship with Procter and Gamble, but we just lost the account. Like, what? How did Junip know what to do with P&G? So, long story short, demography, ageism, longevity, and wisdom. Those 4 add up to age debt, and it is blatantly obvious to me in the research I did that it is here and now in Asia, in Europe, and coming for the Americas, but it is weirdly ignored. And so the age debt is piling up wherever I look. And it's just something that needs to be talked about, discussed, and hopefully at least eradicated to the point where we can look at it as an opportunity for doing something different.
Wow, that's really big. And you think about how can corporate leaders, how do they miss this, right? You talk about outdated assumptions, things that, like, for example, 65 is a retirement age. That's kind of this old assumption or myth that people retire at that point. And as you said, with longevity, I mean, that's no longer the case. Also, from a financial perspective, people probably haven't saved, or maybe they haven't saved enough to retire at age 65. So how does this myth keep rooted so deeply amongst executive ranks? I don't get it.
Well, I have a theory, and then there's some sort of actual practice points that I'll bring up. But first of all, theory. This is not a file of importance. And in the book, I actually sort of cheekily say I could call this the climb edge crisis, but we're too busy not dealing with the climate crisis. So we're not going to tackle the climb age crisis, right? CLIMAGE. So it's way down. It's not even way down the list. It's not even on the list, because this is like thinking out to 2030, 2035, 2040, yet this is like a slow osmosis where the room is slowly filling up with more age debt. And then as older leaders, have other problems and files to deal with, this is going to be someone else's problem. Let's don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thinking, which is just terrifying and terrible in the same breath.
Yeah.
So that's number one. That's the kind of Dan's cheeky theory perspective. Number two is that, well, I guess on the practical side, this isn't costing per se money yet. And when it's not costing money and organizations are still really thinking about, well, how do I save money? How do I cut costs? This is more of we're just running the business like we did in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So we're just going to continue on. Yet fundamentally, everything has changed since 2007-8 with the fiscal cliff crisis. Yet we're still trying to play the economic prowess power of how we used to do it in this new model in 2026 going forward. It's just from an economic perspective, it's bonkers, weird, backwards. But because it's not it's not a line item to say it's costing us money, so we don't have to do anything about it. We're still working with the relics of the past. So shareholder return, profit return, dividend thinking, all of that. Correct. On a for-profit publicly traded company, and then just EBITDA and sort of cost containment, cost effectiveness is still there. The whole age thing is not on the list.
No, I was going to say it's not. They don't look at the opportunity cost, which is what it is at the moment, right? They're looking at the actual accounting cost of older workers on the bottom line. I think that's part of the blindness, maybe.
They're a cost. It's a cost. And so what's the best way to become more efficient with our costs is to start looking at your number one expense, that's salary. And when you look then deep dive into the line items of salary, that's typically middle-aged to older workers who have tenure and have worked up, quote, the career ladder to make more on their job description pay. And so ergo, what happens is, bean counters and the like look at it and say, okay, well, we could get rid of 6 young people or 2 older folks. We're good. Let's get rid of those 2, and we'll call it a day. So the whole thing has to be re-architected, quite frankly, because again, number 3, to my point, was human resources / people and culture. They're the ones that are supposed to be in charge of sort of the talent pipeline, the culture, the evolution of how we do work. And there are nary a percentage over 10, I would say, that is actually forward-thinking, driving the change that's required for the rest of their colleagues in the C-suite to actually make this a file of importance. And this is not going to come from a COO, CFO. This is not going to come from the chief revenue officer. This is not coming from your CIO, CTO. It's just not going to happen. That's just not their bailiwick. So wherever I go now, I urge CHROs and directors and VPs of HR and P&C, people and culture, to actually begin the process of raising this up at the C-level so that it becomes a file.
Right. I have to admit, I've seen the flow often going from, let's say, from the finance department to the human resources department, right? Hey, this is the cost. You guys get this much resources, and that's it. You have to meet this. The flow doesn't really go the other way. There is not that conversation on that the strategic view of what they have to do over the long term. And you, I'm sure, know how budgeting works, right? You have, and I'm being a little bit cynical here, how companies try to, every department fights for its maximum amount of budget possible and fights for it and tries to keep that year after year after year. And then along comes finance. And as you said, they look for the biggest line item where they can cut costs. And typically that's going to be employees, and that's going to be older employees. At least that's been my experience in the several companies that I've been with through multiple waves of let's say involuntary or even voluntary retirements.
Well, there's a term that's used for short-term thinking called short-termism, and that short-termism, John, it's usually applied to how we will do whatever it takes to make the quarter and or make the annual and or if you're publicly traded, to make whatever is applicable to giving back again on a shareholder buyback or shareholder return or dividends. And
Mhm.
so the company twists itself into a gymnastics trampoline pose to do everything it can to ultimately acquiesce to what either the street says, i.e., in the for profit publicly traded companies, or what the board or what the C suite says we will do to make our EBITDA level. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not naive. I've been in capitalism. I know how it works. What I'm getting at is that if we don't apply an antithetical short-termism kind of thinking to age, i.e., if we just think that we can sort of whack older people or even not hire younger people, that's a whole other kettle of fish we should get into, because we don't want the costs of having the young people and their benefits, et cetera. We don't want to bring them in. We can use AI. Don't worry, we're fine. Or to your point, nuking or getting rid of, terminating older folks because they're more expensive. They're the top of the line on the payroll, and that's our number one expense. All of that to me is short-termism. That is analogous to sort of the for-profit side of how we twist ourselves into a gymnastics trampoline move to do whatever we can to make the street happy or the shareholders happy or the profit takers. But on the age side, if we are employing the same, I guess, vernacular, if not analogy, and we are applying a short-termism approach to talent and not thinking about the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years of our organization and doing whatever we can to just eradicate costs, that's short-termism with your talent pool, and that is a way to basically create and set fire to your own burning bridge.
Right. I see that coming, and yeah, the demographic shift. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. It's coming, and before we started to record, we briefly talked about how when is that coming? When will it be felt in the Americas, and let's say in Canada or in the United States? What's your estimate? I have my
Well,
estimate,
let's
but
actually,
I'll let
yeah,
you go
it's
first.
a great question. That's a great question. Let's go Asia, Europe, Americas, and just
Okay.
sort of like follow the westerly wind, as I call it, I guess. So I'm sitting in one of the, I'll never forget this. So I'm sitting in the 20th floor of the Bank of Japan talking with one of their economists. And basically, this is the two lines that were used on me after sort of 90 minutes of charts and like looking at the future of Japan, etc. Number one, Dan, when you go back to Canada, make sure that you tell your people not to do what Japan is doing. I was like, well, okay, so that's good. That's from the chief economist. That's very interesting. Number two, Dan, did you know in 2024, adult diapers outsold baby diapers in Japan?
Wow.
And then my jaw dropped. And I thought, okay, that is just not something that's ever computed in my head before, but here we are.
No.
And so that's Japan. That's now China. It's certainly South Korea. You look at where Asia, as I call it, the kind of canary in the age coal mine, those countries, like basically Asia, mostly, generally speaking, Asia. There's a couple outlier countries, but mostly Asia is in the same predicament, is that because there was not a lot of immigration, sort of closed borders, and then birth rates plummeted. So you can see the contraction of their population and their GDP and them scrambling to figure out how they keep their economies rolling. That's today. If you go west from Asia, if you will, going that way, towards Europe, you're beginning to see now the fraying of the sweater or the fraying of the scarf, whichever way you want it, and the yarn is now it's like 20 meters downstream. You're like, wait, that used to be part of the sweater or the scarf. What's going on? Whether it's France or Italy or Germany or Switzerland, they are beginning right now to enter into a OMG moment whereby they realize that in certain sectors, they just don't have bodies that are up and coming. So they are struggling / grappling with what to do. So for example, in Italy, their construction workers are now at a point in which that they're pleading with younger workers, younger people to come into the trades, to come into construction. Their average age has shot up over the last 10 years. And so they're just not having the same type of progression from a talent perspective, a pool perspective of in the construction industry. That's just one. I could go through all of it and say they are now beginning, right, to grapple with what is it that they're going to do. Then you get to the Americas. And by the way, all the while, since the early 1970s, birth rates are plummeting, but no one's really paying attention to it. So whether it's Asia, Europe, or North America, South America, Africa is actually okay, by the way, from a population birth rate perspective. It has dropped. It's not quite at below the replacement rate as a continent, but it's on its way. So number 4 out of our not very good situations demographically is Africa, the continent. So Asia, terrible. Europe, it's a silver medal terrifying situation that they're grappling with. In the Americas, OMG is just about to hit. So Canada's birth rate plummeting just like the other 2 regions, currently sits at 1.26. And as immigration levels have been capped, or I guess lowered, as has happened in the US, you can now see, again, stress. So just a couple examples. In Canada, just about a month ago, so the federal government sort of holds a big press conference. And I paid attention to this particular one because it was the industry minister coming out and saying, all right, folks, we're going to run out of miners. If any young people would like to come into the mining profession, we've got a ticket for you. And they've done the math from a demographics perspective and realized that the average age of the miners in Canada is like 49. They're like, oof, what are we going to do here? In America, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, sort of issued a plea a couple weeks ago and said, we're running out of sewers and seamstresses. You're like, what? Like, yeah. So if you want your suit tailored, etc., the average age of the sewer seamstress tailor in America is 54. The average age. And so you're like, what? Like, people don't want to get into the sewing seamstress, tailor profession? Turns out not.
Interesting.
So it has that has skyrocketed the last 10 years, that average age, and with people dying literally at their place of work because they couldn't sell their shop and they kept being seamstresses or sewers or tailors, and like, no one's buying my shop, no one wants to be this, so they die and roll. It is. So I'm just giving you little pieces of colored commentary where wherever you go, whatever you look at, aside from maybe professional sports, which looks like they're fine, minute little population that get to be athletic athletes, male or female, professional athletes. But regardless, when you look around in any industry, everywhere you look, it's like, whoa, there is a longevity issue, an ageism issue, there's a wisdom transfer issue, and of course, there's this demographic issue that's happening.
It's incredible to see how that's coming, and somehow you're not watching it. It's like a train, a train crash that you can clearly see is coming, and yet there's not much reaction to it. You mentioned, of course. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say quickly, like a line I've used with my publisher, who she's just amazing. When I say to Jesse, I said this last year, I said, look, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so every time that I see her and we talk about the book or whatever, she's like, when you told me that line, that's like, now I see it everywhere. It's like, I cannot unsee this demographic change that's happening.
That's the first half of my conversation with Dan Pontefract. I hope you found it as fascinating and even as alarming as I did. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you don't miss the second half of our conversation next week.